The National Mall, 146 acres of memorials and monuments in the heart of Washington, D.C., reflects the topography of our national conscience. The designer, Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, in 1791, envisioned a space in which monuments and memorials represented the American character of courage, honor, and memory. But the American character, as epitomized by the famous phrase of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, has a fierce streak of individualism. Fittingly, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, a controversial design by Maya Lin for a controversial war, ironically provided the key for individual responses to war and transformed the way Americans experienced their own versions of courage, honor, and fractured memories. Ultimately, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was the turning point for how all Americans accepted their losses from the psychic and physical wounds of war. Historically, memorial monument design conveyed messages of sacrifice and achievement, but it failed to address the real consequence of war, pain and inconsolable grief. The remedy for this was the idea of naming the dead on Civil War monuments. The reason they did this was that, with the absence of dog tags, they couldn't identify the bodies, but they could identify the missing. This idea of naming the dead resurfaced after World War I. Yet, even worse than the physical casualties was the lingering impact of mental suffering. In the Civil War, it was called soldier's heart. In World War I and World War II, it was called shell shock. But ever since 1980, when it entered the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, it's been called post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. In the Vietnam War, the distance between the dead and the missing, and those suffering from PTSD, was especially disproportionate. In addition to depression, drug addiction, and increased suicide, veterans also suffered from survivor's guilt, not merely because they survived, but of what they survived.
I never had any fear when I was in combat, any of the time that I was in Vietnam. I was 22 years old, made out of steel, couldn't do anything, and wasn't afraid to do anything. And nothing bothered me when I saw it while I was in country. The only time it bothered me was when I saw it here. It was my obligation. I fulfilled my obligation, and I'm proud of that.
Nights are long since you went away. I think about you all through the day. My buddy, nobody quite so true. Miss your voice, the touch of your hand, just long to know that you understand. My buddy, your buddy misses you.
The funny thing about coming back is that there was no such thing as a transition. You were on your own. There was no support from anybody. The only thing you got treated for was if you had physical wounds. If you had any other kind of problems, there was just nothing there.
In 1979, 4 years after the end of the Vietnam War, Jan Scruggs, a wounded and decorated infantryman, and a group of other Vietnam veterans founded the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. The VVMF sponsored a memorial design competition to give the Vietnam veterans a tangible symbol of recognition from the American people. The competition had only 2 criteria: that the design contain the names of those who died or were missing in action, and that it be apolitical and harmonious with the site. With this memorial, they hoped to begin a process of national reconciliation. The jury sorted through the 1,441 submissions. The winner, Maya Lin, a 21-year-old Chinese-American undergraduate at Yale University, designed a simple V-shaped black granite wall that was literally and figuratively a gash in the earth. I imagine taking a knife into the earth, opening it up, an initial violence that in time would heal. Her unexpected victory created an uproar. Many critics opposed the stark modernist design, the black granite being used when most other monuments were made of white stone, and that it was effectively a gash in the earth. Most monuments could be seen from afar, whereas Maya Lin's design cut into the sloping earth and was not visible until one approached it. However, what made the memorial so effective were three things. First, the naming of the dead, which Lin admitted was not even a new idea. It had been a feature of the World War I memorial she had studied at Yale, in particular the Thibault Memorial in France, commemorating the Battle of the Somme. Second, the angle of the walls created an invitational design.
It is inviting people to consider diverse perspectives, and it's inviting them to share their perspectives with other people. So it's not trying to convince us all of one thing. It's simply creating a space where we all feel affirmed and where we all feel like we can share our perspectives with others and try to understand the perspectives of other people.
Moreover, the reflective black granite enabled viewers to see themselves amongst the names.
You know, when the names were inscribed and kind of literally chiseled into the black granite, you see the reflections and the names at the same time. You see yourself and the names of the dead at the same time, which was a really unique effect at that time, and incredibly powerful, because then it makes you think about both things at the same time. It makes you think about them, but it also makes you think about yourself and how you're making sense of what you're seeing.
Nevertheless, the political uproar surrounding the design was almost successful in shutting it down by James Watt, President Reagan's Secretary of the Interior. Ultimately, a compromise was reached to add the statue of 3 soldiers and an American flag 30 feet to the side of the monument. The wall was completed in late October 1982 and unveiled on November 13th. It wasn't until the unveiling of the wall when Americans finally acknowledged the soldiers' sacrifice and came to terms with opposing political views about war. Finally, veterans were able to face their survivors' guilt and painful losses.
There's a song that will linger forever in our ears. Oh, hard times come again no more.
The Vietnam Veterans Memorial represents a pivotal moment in the transformation of public space as a healing monument. In 2010, the journal Environment and Behavior, looking at the impact of the memorial on PTSD symptoms, said, "The design of the Vietnam Memorial and other successful memorials responds to and interacts with the user at each stage of his or her shared personal journey." And Harvard Medical School, in a 1995 study, noted that although 15.2% of Vietnam veterans continue to suffer from PTSD, by confronting their trauma at the Vietnam Memorial, they were able to overcome their helplessness and despair. But the most powerful effect remains the transformative element of the 58,132 names inscribed on its walls. Marita Sturken, a communication professor at NYU, concludes, "To imagine for each name the grieving parents, sisters, brothers, girlfriends, wives, and children. The simple design allows each visitor to bring his own story to the wall and take away his own meaning."
Every time that I see someone who is wearing a hat that says Vietnam veteran, shake his hand and thank him for his service.